You'll see this going live and bringing the Global Blockchain Week, to the masses, as they say. Dubai has been a wonderful place. The UAE has given us a wonderful framework to grow our businesses, and I feel like it's it's our time now to give back. So you'll see me here over the next 6 months, really championing our blockchain and our DeFi and everything else, and also showcasing the UAE.
Fantastic. So there's been some amazing things going on over the past year. So I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to say, like, what do you think are the most important trends and where do you think this is all going?
I think there's two major game changers that you touched on a little bit. One is the rise of stablecoins, that the most popular asset to transact over blockchain networks is the US dollar. That wasn't something that we anticipated a few years ago, but it's just grown by leaps and bounds. And the second is the rise of decentralized exchanges. A few years ago, you mentioned Coinbase. If you weren't listed on Coinbase or Binance, you didn't exist. But today, with the rise of governance tokens, with the rise of DAOs, and with the adoption of decentralized exchanges, it's almost unnecessary to have any interaction with a centralized exchange in order to be a vibrant, successful crypto project today.
If I can jump in on that, if we can keep the banner going. The point you brought up is very interesting because with the decentralized exchanges, we have, many of us do it, right? We've all made a lot of money margin trading, or maybe lost a lot of money with workload, right? If you're really in it. But with the decentralized exchange, we have a situation where it is not possible to make up these coins. And on a lot of the centralized exchanges, in the margin trading and everything else, there are many, many more Bitcoins and many more Ether and many more other coins that are being traded and are really in existence. And it is something that as our space matures and as more regulation comes in, it's going to be interesting to see how that works. I'm a big fan of these decentralized exchanges. I think that even if you look at one of the coins that I work with quite a bit, Revolution Populi, only on a decentralized exchange. Look at the growth of that token and how it has progressed. Obviously, great team behind it as well. But it is an interesting situation where you have only this trustless, this completely public ledger system. I think it's very important.
So it's actually great that Cal's coming next because you're quite right, but you've got the risk of these co-government organisations, and we've had more than 120 million stolen from decentralised exchanges, and so there's kind of regulatory issues about how you govern a co-governed institution. So Cal, take it away with your trends, but maybe you can just touch on some of those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We went from 0 to 100 real quick there. That went pretty quick. Look, so I mean, to answer your question, first of all, what's the two big things for me this year? And then, DeFi absolutely is the winner. But to go DeFi, and when I say DeFi, real, actual decentralized organizations, not masquerading decentralized, I mean actual, no centralized, decentralized thing. I'm trying to explain to people that in this day and age, an organization, a group, a corporation can be purely decentralized and still mind blowing something. They'll still ask me the question, well, where are they based? Where's their head office? It doesn't quite work like that. So 1 second, I need to keep 1 second. And so I think regulators, the biggest challenge for regulators coming up and that we're seeing in this current market is trying to explain that to people. If we were to flashback 3 years ago, setting up a project, organizing raise, whatever it may have been, the first question was, I was always asked, where do I raise from? Where do I set up? Where's the best jurisdiction? Where am I going to be the safest? Actually, evolution of this industry is taking us in a completely different way. We're now not looking at one jurisdiction, we're actually looking at no jurisdiction. We're actually completely decentralizing the project and saying it doesn't actually have a footprint anywhere. It has an ecosystem which is everywhere. And that is, if you think about it, especially from a regulatory and legal perspective, is mind-blowing. Because it's not saying we're not above the law, none of this is above the law, it's still applicable, but at the same time, a lot of these projects, and I think folks were asking questions earlier, maybe yourself, Where should I set up? Where are the biggest, what are the challenges we're seeing here in the Gulf region? Well, actually, everything has become phenomenally international to the extent that it really doesn't matter where you set up because you can use everything, almost pick and choose the best parts of what you want.
Well, you brought up some really, really great points. Obviously, I'm a lawyer, right? So, that's it. But a great example of these decentralized autonomous organizations is even Liberland. Let's look at Liberland, right? My friend President Viv started this country, Liberland, a few years ago. I actually met him here in Dubai about 5 years ago. Great guy. I work in the diplomatic space with these guys. Wonderful person. But here we have, and there is a little piece of land, but it's basically a virtual country, and they're operating in a blockchain type system. They're building it and everything else. But this is also what I talk about with the whole monetary revolution. We heard you say it on stage all the time. We had a great panel at the Joseph Family Office Summit on the monetary revolution. The span of President Vitt and His Highness Senator Habsburg and Dr. Marwan, big name here in Dubai, and we spoke about it. But it's taken the governments of the world a while, even like 5 years, to realize what's going on. But this blockchain system, this DeFi system that we have, we're able to vote, we're able to participate. And if you look at Liberland, as an example, to mention them again, but they have, the way they're going to vote and everything is with their merits. So they have their token, it's the merit token. And you're going to be able to participate like that. And it's not something that's foreign. In the US, in the early days, you had to own land in order to vote. And so it's interesting how this is evolving. And it's going in ways that really we didn't know it was going to go in the beginning.
So I think that's a really interesting point because basically people are experimenting with and reinventing the entire global financial system. But one of the points that you made, Jonathan, was just let's talk about stablecoins for a minute because, as I said, the growth of stablecoins is phenomenal. They're essentially private currencies, and we have several different types of stablecoins that are emerging from those that innovators are building to the sort of threatened or promised Facebook deal, to what the Chinese are doing with the digital yuan. And one of my personal interests is what stablecoins can do for financial inclusion. And we're sitting here in the middle of a region which has both the richest and poorest people in the world, and thinking about how we can connect with those poor people using stablecoins is really powerful. So Jonathan, I'd love to hear your perspective on the growth and potential opportunities with stablecoins.
I think not all stablecoins are created equal. That's something that we have to understand. There's really 3 different categories of stablecoins that have had any level of success in the market. You can call them anchor coins, where a bank or an institution will collect traditional world currency, usually dollars, it could be gold or something similar, and then they will mint tokens that represent what they are custodying. So those are custodial coins. USDC and Tether are the most popular there, and it's grown astronomically over the last 5 years. The next are the algorithmic stablecoins, which is much more of an experiment, and that's not necessarily backed by anything purely than the market. And then the third is debt coins, with the most popular of those being MakerDAO. I think what we're seeing now is these 3 different types are finding their niches and popular use cases. Obviously, banker coins are moving more towards the regulatory compliance and institutional mechanism. And then the debt vehicles like MakerDAO are focusing more on yield generation for native crypto assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum, ways that you can essentially take a loan off of assets that you might already hold. And then what interests me the most are the algorithmic stablecoins, which have grown significantly over the last year, with the most popular of that being the Terra Luna pair. And we've seen that these types of coins have an opportunity to create the type of global inclusion that you've mentioned, because they are censorship resistant. They're not run by any one particular organization. There's no bank or government infrastructure that can turn them off or prevent a certain type of person or a certain regulatory ecosystem from participating. So I anticipate that of the 3, the one that has the largest potential growth sector is the censorship-resistant algorithmic stablecoin.
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
And that is a really good point. The biggest problem with stablecoins at the moment, when we put it in the context of regional economic disparity, is a lot of stablecoins really have to be end-to-end for every transaction in order for them to work properly. And if we contrast and compare that to, different type of token or coin or whatever, insert generic token used here, right? At some point, somebody's thinking in their mind, how can I cash out? The logic of stablecoin is that's your endpoint. You've already cashed out, and you're using that to facilitate the transaction. And for a stablecoin to be truly successful, you have to be able to take your stablecoin and spend it at some point. Otherwise, you're just off-ramping back into the fiat world, which faces the same problem. Same banking issues, same monetary disparity. So I think, to expand on what you were saying, in order for any kind of stablecoin to really have that big regional impact, that I think we actually all want to see. I think you first of all have to get stablecoins being used a lot more, so that hypothetical use case scenario, if an individual in one country, the UAE, was to send money to another country across border, they'd be able to use that currency in the country of receipt exactly the same as if they were to use it here. That's why fiat currencies work so well, because you can spend everywhere. So that's the hurdle we need to overcome.
So I just want to tell you the really sad news, we've got about 1 minute each left. I've just been given the 5-minute signal a minute ago, so Bruce, you just, whatever message you want to give to our audience, get it out there.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll just touch, really briefly. It's a interesting situation that we have with stablecoins. Obviously, some of the ways that both of these my esteemed colleagues have talked about the new ways that these are working. We obviously, everybody knows that SDT is not fully backed, and it's this, and really none of them are. So it's an interesting situation, kind of operating in a fun type of way. All of us know that if there is a run on the bank, we could all be in for a heck of a hurting. And I have more than once changed my USDT into some other type of stable thinking, oh, I think today it's going to happen. It doesn't seem to be. It's kind of like the world collapse of the economy collapse. I don't know, guys, when it's going to happen. I do think it probably will happen. I don't know when. But some of the ways that they both spoke about with these new emerging ways to use these stable coins, I think are really the direction that we need to go.
Okay, Jonathan, you want to go next?
So something that we did get to touch on is it's specifically around the onboarding ramps. It's that something else that we've seen get much easier is the onboarding ramps on a global scale. And I think that that's a key missing link, and probably will be a great opportunity for entrepreneurs over the next 5 years. Whoever can nail onboarding, bridging the traditional finance, the purchasing points, the interacting with your bank, paying back your mortgage, getting a car loan, and the crypto industry. I mean, the use case is obvious, and it will drastically increase the amount of eyes and operators within the crypto ecosystem.
Thanks so much. Cal, last thought from you.
Yeah, I mean, stablecoins from a regulatory perspective are a nightmare. Anybody who tells you anything different is just lying to you. There's a whole new world of rules we can expect over the next 12, 24 days before things really start kicking in. So what I'd say to people is, when we put stablecoins in context, I think the intent there is good to actually help people do good things with cross-border transactions, assisting unbanked populations, very healthy, very good things. And I think at some point we need to just make sure that we don't lose sight of that, especially when we are kind of building things. So maybe regulators can keep that developing their matrix.
Okay, thank you. So my call out is play to win games, because what we've seen during the pandemic in a number of emerging economies is people are actually earning money to put food on the table of their families during a time of extreme crisis. So these are really, really interesting things for the future, particularly for the poor and the vulnerable, and opportunities to create these whole new ecosystems where the participants and the players own and earn money from the games. I think this is super interesting. But I think in closing, I'd like to thank this fabulous panel. We had nowhere near enough time, but I hope that we've at least seeded the idea that this is building an entirely new financial system. It's experimental. There's lots of wins and losses and mistakes, but the growth and the development and experimentation is incredibly exciting. So thank you very much, everyone, for this panel.
Thank you, and thank you to the DeFi Investment Summit. Appreciate that.